Hello, and welcome to the Northwest Naturalist Notebook. I'm your host, Kirsten, the Northwest Naturalist. Today we're going to be talking about 4 easy tips for identifying something new we encounter out in nature. So let's jump in. So imagine for a moment you're walking outside in your neighborhood, a local park, or even somewhere far away, when suddenly there in front of you is something that you've never seen before. And of course, you want to figure out what it is. But how do you do that? I will be the first to admit that this is something I am still working on. There are so many incredible plants, animals, fungi, and more across our planet, and oftentimes even in our backyards. There's always something new to learn or something that might surprise us. And oftentimes, the factors that separate one species from another could be really small or subtle. And as one fellow naturalist once told me, as long as you or somebody else is not planning to eat it, it's probably even okay if you misidentify something once in a while as you learn. But to help us with this process, we're going to talk about 4 ways that you can improve your skills of observation and better identify the things you encounter. My first tip for improving your observation skills out in the field is size. Now, it always helps to have some handy tools with us out in the field. I like to carry one inside my journal taped in a pocket in the front cover. I have this handy naturalist back sheet from John Muir Laws. It's linked on my blog, and you can see it's got lots of fantastic tools, including a ruler in inches and centimeters, as well as a protractor. It's light, it's portable, and you can tuck it almost anywhere. The other tool I like to carry with me is a small credit card sized ruler with centimeters on one side, inches on the other, and this one even has a handy magnifier in the center so that we can get those up close views. Whenever possible, I like to take multiple measurements, things like length, width, height, to give me as much detail as possible. But sometimes we may not have tools with us in the field. That's where the skill of estimation can come in, using things like our hands, fingers, or even our boots to help us measure the relative size of something, or even our whole body. That's something that we carry around with us everywhere, and we can easily calculate how we compare to the things around us. We can also use common features from our environment to help us compare as well. In the Merlin app from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, you can see a comparison scale looking at the size of birds relative to common species like sparrows, robins, crows, and geese. We can also use comparisons within the observation itself, comparing things like the size of a flower, seed, or fruit to that of the leaves of the plant. Tip number 2 is to look at the shape. For objects like leaves, you can often find resources in guidebooks or online that will give you a descriptive name for different general leaf shapes or arrangement patterns. However, I oftentimes find it helpful to think about what those remind us of. Rather than thinking of a lanceolate leaf, thinking about how its shape reminds us of a sword or spear, or that palmate leaves look like an open hand, like those of a maple. Take the time to really look closely at what you're observing, noticing things like where is the widest point and where is the narrowest? How are things arranged compared to each other? I recently noticed myself as I was doing a closer observation that sword ferns were not as straight on their leaves as I had thought. In fact, they actually have a small thumb-like protrusion near where the leaf connects to the branchlet. Also, make sure you're taking the time to notice how many of something there is. What's the quantity of things like leaves on a branch or branchlet, the number of needles that are in a single cluster, or how many petals are on a flower. The same can be true for when we're observing animals. What general shape does the animal have? In birds, we might pay close attention to the shape of the bill, as it might give us important information about what it might feed on, be that nectar, seeds, or even other animals. Or when in flight, we might notice things like the shape of the wing or how it moves. Which brings us to tip number 3, sight. Location, location, location. Pay careful attention to where it is that you've encountered this species. For example, here in the Pacific Northwest, I would not expect to encounter a female cardinal, but I might come across a cedar waxwing, which has very similar coloration if seen quickly. It's also important to keep in mind that the same species may appear differently in different environments. For example, the ponderosa pines that grow to the east of the Cascade Range look very different from those on the western side here in the Willamette Valley. Each of them is adapted to their environment. The same might be true for poison oak, which will look like a very different plant in some ways if you encounter it in an open oak savanna versus growing in a forest. This is one area where using reference photos can also be very helpful. If we use tools like iNaturalist, we can see similar species that we might expect to encounter in the ecosystem we're currently visiting. Which brings us finally to tip number 4, shade. Now, for many of us, the number one tool we're going to use to decide what we're seeing is the use of color. However, it's not always that simple. Different people quite literally see colors differently because of minute differences in our eyes. Furthermore, we may not even describe the color we're seeing in the same way. For me personally, I compare a lot of different colors to other things that I've encountered in nature, but that may not be the practice for everyone. It's also important to pay attention to where the lighter areas are or where something is darker and the role that our environment could be playing in that. Things like the weather, the direction of the sun, or time of year. And to make things even more interesting, genetics within what we're observing could also add a layer. Some flowers come in different varieties, like stream violets could appear in yellow or white. Some flowers will change color once they've been pollinated, or different morphs, like those seen in red-tailed hawks, could cause some distinct differences in colors. It can help us to have a starting point when deciding what it is we've seen. We can then use tools like guidebooks for our local ecosystem or tools online like eBird, iNaturalist, or even Google Lens to help us narrow down what we might have encountered. And while they may not help us in every situation, starting our observations with the 4 tips of size, shape, sight, and shade, we're off to a great start for identifying anything we might encounter on our travels. And when we record this information through the use of words, pictures, and numbers, we add even more detail to our learning journey as naturalists. So the next time you are outdoors and encounter something new, give these 4 tips a try. Feel free to like, comment, or subscribe below. Until next time, happy exploring.